began the way these things often do, in silence, in secrecy, in the middle of nowhere. For months, the world had been told little more than fragments that a meteorite had crashed into a barren desert plateau, that it had been quickly quarantined by military personnel, and that scientists were working, around the clock, to determine its composition. But what the press releases didn't say, what never made it to television screens, was that this wasn't an ordinary meteorite. It wasn't even an ordinary extraterrestrial rock. From the very first scans, those who handled it knew they were staring at something that defied explanation. The meteorite was massive, nearly the size of a city bus, but its surface didn't resemble any other object that had fallen from space. Instead of scorched rock, it gleamed as though it had been forged. Smooth metallic ridges traced its surface, patterned with symmetrical grooves that seemed too precise to be natural. It looked less like a fallen stone and more like a fragment of a machine, or a vessel that had endured unimaginable forces before colliding with Earth. At first, researchers insisted the markings were the result of impact fracturing, yet the grooves repeated in spirals and lattices, curving with mathematical perfection. When artificial intelligence models were used to analyze the shapes, the conclusion was unnerving. The patterns aligned with fractal designs similar to computer code. The meteorite wasn't just shaped strangely, it seemed to be inscribed. Within days, reports leaked from inside the quarantine site. Radiation levels spiked in intervals, not randomly, but in rhythmic pulses, as though the meteorite was sending out a signal. Instruments recorded bursts of electromagnetic activity that echoed across multiple frequencies, bouncing off satellites and disrupting local communications. One technician swore the pulses were more than interference. When charted, they looked like waveforms, structured, deliberate. That was when the meteorite earned its new name among the few who knew of it, the beacon. Stranger still, the rock appeared impervious to conventional tools. Diamond-tipped drills cracked against its surface without leaving so much as a scratch. Laser cutters reflected off its ridges as though the metal absorbed and redirected the energy. Even explosives failed to mark it. It was not just durable, it was untouchable. And yet, under certain conditions, the meteorite seemed to react. Heat signatures blossomed deep within it, as though something inside was stirring. On one occasion, a team reported hearing faint vibrations emanating from its core, like the hum of machinery idling in the dark. The military tightened its grip. The crash site was fenced off with layers of barbed wire, soldiers patrolling day and night. Satellite imagery of the region was classified, journalists barred from entry. To the outside world, the event was a rumor, another conspiracy theory swallowed by the noise of the internet. But for those inside the perimeter, it was something else entirely. The sense that they were standing at the edge of contact, staring at a visitor no one had expected. And then, something changed. 2 weeks after the meteorite's arrival, the pulses grew stronger, carrying farther. Civilian radio operators hundreds of miles away reported bursts of strange static that repeated in loops. Amateur astronomers claimed their telescopes picked up unexplained signals bouncing off the ionosphere. Inside the quarantine, computers connected to the meteorite began to malfunction. Hard drives wiped themselves, screens filled with cascading symbols, and entire systems went offline. It was as though the object was reaching out, not just broadcasting, but interacting. A scientist, speaking anonymously, later described what she saw in those cascading symbols. They weren't random, she said. They formed diagrams, schematics, almost as if the meteorite was attempting to teach or to build something through code. But each time the system recorded them, the files self-erased, leaving only corrupted fragments. By then, panic had set in among the staff. Some wanted to shut everything down, bury the object, and pretend it never happened. Others argued it was the discovery of the century, proof of intelligence beyond Earth. But before either side could act, the meteorite decided for them. Late one night, under floodlights and watchtowers, the beacon stirred. The pulses became deafening, shaking equipment and rattling windows. The ground around it cracked, splitting in lines that mirrored the grooves etched into its surface. Witnesses swore they saw light bleed from inside the meteorite, a cold, pale glow that illuminated the desert like a second moon. Soldiers raised their weapons, scientists shielded their eyes, and for a moment, the world stood still. The glow faded as quickly as it came, but the damage was done. Instruments confirmed the meteorite wasn't a lifeless fragment. It was active, and whatever had been sleeping inside it had just begun to wake. The situation, once contained, had grown into something else. Something alive, something alien, and something far beyond humanity's control. Chapter 2: The desert was no longer quiet. From the moment the beacon stirred, the entire landscape seemed to shift. The ground trembled at irregular intervals, like the aftershocks of a distant quake. Though no fault lines existed in the region, animals fled the area in droves. Wild dogs, jackals, even birds that once circled above disappeared from the skies. Local villagers, living miles from the perimeter, began reporting strange lights on the horizon at night, shimmering like heat mirages that pulsed in time with the meteorite's rhythm. Inside the quarantine zone, the atmosphere grew tense. Soldiers stood guard with weapons that now felt useless, while scientists argued in circles. One faction demanded evacuation before something catastrophic happened. The other, intoxicated by the potential for discovery, pushed for deeper investigation. But the beacon made their decision irrelevant. Each day it changed, subtly at first, then alarmingly. The grooves on its surface, once faint etchings, began to glow faintly at night. At first the light was no more than a shimmer, like moonlight glancing off polished stone. But soon it brightened into a lattice of blue fire crawling across its ridges, forming symmetrical grids that expanded and contracted like breathing. Instruments confirmed the light was not just illumination. It was energy, surging in measurable waves that radiated outward. Some devices overloaded simply by being too close. Even stranger were the effects on people. Guards complained of headaches and dizziness whenever the pulses intensified. Scientists reported vivid dreams, all eerily similar. Vast landscapes under alien skies, machines shaped like colossal insects, and structures that seemed to grow out of both metal and stone. These dreams spread like infection, passing from person to person until nearly the entire camp admitted to experiencing them. A few began drawing the shapes they saw in their sleep. To the horror of their colleagues, the sketches matched the grooves etched into the meteorite. By the third week, the beacon had begun to influence the environment itself. Compass needles spun erratically, radio towers in towns 100 miles away flickered with static, and migratory patterns of animals shifted. A team conducting soil analysis found microscopic metallic filaments spreading outward from the meteorite, threading through the sand like roots. They weren't natural minerals, they were ordered, uniform, as though the object were planting itself into the earth. Panic rippled through the quarantine. A meeting was called with high-ranking military officials flown in under the cover of night. The discussion was heated, almost desperate. Should they attempt to destroy the object, relocate it, or surrender to the fact that it could not be controlled? Every option felt like suicide. One general demanded the use of tactical explosives, insisting no foreign object could withstand the full force of modern weaponry. But the scientists reminded him, they had already tried. The beacon had absorbed it all. That same night, the pulses changed again. Instead of radiating outward in uniform waves, they began to carry structure. Monitors displayed peaks and valleys in repeating patterns, resembling language. Artificial intelligence programs attempted to translate them, but the output grew stranger with every iteration: strings of numbers, geometric diagrams, and fragments of text in no known human tongue. And yet, one word appeared again and again across the corrupted files: awaken. The word spread through the camp like a curse. Even the soldiers began whispering it. Some believed the beacon was not just a vessel but a living entity, waiting for a signal, or giving one. Others feared it was a weapon, designed to burrow into worlds and rewrite them. Then, On the 21st night, the dreams escalated. Nearly every person inside reported the same vision, standing beneath a black sky, staring at colossal structures rising like towers of bone and metal, while a voice, deep, resonant, inhuman, echoed a single phrase, "You have been noticed." The following morning, as the sun rose red over the desert, the beacon split, not shattered, not broken, but parted down its center, opening like a chrysalis. From within came light so bright it carved shadows across the camp, a radiance too pure to look at directly. Sensors went wild, alarms shrieked, and men dropped their weapons in awe. The thing inside was no simple rock. It was a construct, a machine, or perhaps something stranger, that had been waiting, dormant, until Earth itself became its stage. The world thought it was studying a meteorite. In truth, the meteorite had been studying them, and now the beacon wasn't silent anymore. It was awake. Chapter 3. The day the beacon opened, the desert ceased to feel like Earth. Heat shimmered unnaturally across the horizon, not from the sun but from the energy radiating out of the exposed construct. Its two halves yawned apart, revealing an interior that looked nothing like stone. The inside pulsed with veins of silver light, weaving in spirals that seemed alive, shifting as though adjusting to the air. No one could look at it for long without their eyes watering, their minds buzzing as if struck by static. At first, the soldiers aimed their rifles, hands shaking, but no order came to fire. Even the generals, who had flown in the day before, stood speechless. To shoot at the beacon now felt less like destroying an object and more like provoking a presence. One officer later admitted that in those moments, it felt as though the construct was watching them, judging them. The first anomaly appeared only hours later. A communications array positioned near the perimeter suddenly reactivated despite being powered down. It transmitted a stream of binary code for exactly 11 minutes before going silent again. Analysts rushed to decode it. What they found wasn't gibberish. It was a series of coordinates. And not just one set, dozens scattered across the globe. Deserts, oceans, forests, even beneath polar ice. The implication was chilling. The beacon wasn't alone. Inside the camp, things grew stranger. People who had complained of headaches before now reported hearing faint voices, not in their ears, but in their minds. At first it was whispers, incoherent fragments, but as the day passed, the voices grew clearer, almost conversational. One guard claimed he heard instructions telling him to stand at attention, and when he obeyed, the voice praised him. Another scientist reported being urged to record the symbols on the monitors, and when she did, the beacon's pulses intensified as if responding in approval. It wasn't just broadcasting anymore. It was interacting, assigning roles, testing boundaries. That night the dreams returned with brutal intensity. Every person in the camp saw the same image. A colossal structure hovering in a black sky, shaped like an endless spiral of metal and bone. At its center burned a light so vast it seemed alive, and beneath it, countless smaller constructs, their shapes eerily similar to the beacon, descended on landscapes that looked like Earth, but weren't. Some awoke in terror, swearing the visions were not dreams at all but memories forced into their minds. By dawn, panic consumed the site. Some soldiers begged to be transferred, while others fell into trances, staring at the beacon for hours as if hypnotized. The general in command ordered a lockdown, but even his authority was eroding. A group of guards attempted to abandon their post and were found hours later wandering the desert, dehydrated, murmuring in unison a phrase no one could translate. Their words didn't match any known language, but when fed into the AI, the system offered a single translation: "We are coming." The construct itself continued to evolve. Metallic filaments stretched from its base into the ground, spreading like roots. Instruments detected seismic vibrations as if something deep below was being awakened in response. Drones sent to monitor the spread malfunctioned and crashed, their last recordings showing flashes of blue light threading through the sand like circuitry spreading across a motherboard. It was then that the higher authorities intervened. A convoy of black trucks arrived, carrying specialists who introduced themselves only as observers. They shut down half the camp's operations, seized all recorded data, and ordered silence from the scientists. But the beacon paid no attention to human politics. That very night, it emitted a pulse unlike any before, a shockwave of light and sound that rolled across the desert, rattling windows in villages 200 miles away. Satellites in orbit registered the event as a massive energy surge, its signature identical to the one recorded when the meteorite first entered Earth's atmosphere. Only this time, the signal was not directed outward into space. It was directed downward into Earth itself. The realization hit like cold water. The beacon hadn't come here by accident. It wasn't simply a fragment of alien technology. It was a key, and Earth was the lock. As the scientists pieced this together, the AI at the camp, still linked to the beacon's signals, displayed one final line before shutting itself off completely. Initialization complete, awaiting arrival. The beacon had awakened, and now it was waiting. For what? No one knew. Chapter 4. By the time the fourth week began, the secret was collapsing. The beacon had grown too powerful, its pulses too vast to remain hidden. Villages hundreds of miles away reported strange power surges, radios buzzing with static that carried faint voices. Pilots flying overhead swore their instruments flickered with symbols instead of numbers, as if their planes had been briefly rewritten. The government's attempts at censorship faltered. Rumors of a living meteor spread across encrypted forums, and grainy satellite images leaked to the public, showing unnatural light blazing across the desert. Inside the perimeter, the beacon was no longer just an object. It was an environment. Its metallic roots had spread across nearly a mile, pushing up through sand and stone, glowing faintly like veins under skin. At night, the roots pulsed with blue light, synchronized with the grooves on its surface. The ground itself seemed to breathe, rising and falling in rhythm with the beacon. Drones that attempted to map the spread crashed mid-flight, their cameras capturing only a blur of light before cutting out. Worse still were the effects on people. Those who stayed too close for too long developed nosebleeds, migraines, even seizures. Yet many refused to leave. Scientists who once worked methodically now scribbled frantically in notebooks, their handwriting jagged and unreadable. Soldiers abandoned their patrols to stand near the beacon, staring into its glow for hours, whispering words in the strange tongue heard in their dreams. One man had to be restrained after attempting to carve symbols into his own skin, claiming the beacon demanded it. The observers, those shadowy officials who had seized control, grew increasingly agitated. They issued orders to prepare containment measures, rolling in massive generators, cryogenic units, and even high-energy weapons. But the beacon seemed to anticipate their moves. Every time they attempted to approach with equipment, the pulses grew violent, shorting out electronics and throwing soldiers to the ground with concussive waves. The message was clear: it would not be caged. Then came the global event. At exactly 03:17 a.m., the beacon unleashed a pulse unlike any before. Satellites recorded a blast of electromagnetic radiation that circled the globe in seconds. Power grids flickered across continents, clocks reset themselves, and in major cities, cell phones lit up simultaneously with the same phrase, scrawled across their screens in jagged symbols that later translated to English. "You are noticed." Panic erupted worldwide. Social media flooded with screenshots and videos. Governments scrambled to issue denials, claiming it was a coordinated cyber attack. But deep inside the desert, those who stood closest to the beacon knew the truth. They had been dreaming the words for weeks. Now the world was dreaming them too. As the planet reeled, the beacon began to change again. The split halves of its shell, once stationary, shifted further apart. From within, a spire of metallic crystal rose, twisting into the night sky. It climbed higher than the floodlights, humming with energy that made the air shimmer. Instruments confirmed the spire was transmitting, not outward into space as before, but upward, straight through the atmosphere into orbit. Satellites caught the signal bouncing from one to another, amplifying itself until it reached far beyond Earth's immediate neighborhood. Inside the command tent, chaos reigned. Some demanded they destroy the beacon immediately, no matter the cost. Others argued it was impossible. The AI systems that had once translated its pulses suddenly reactivated, though no one had turned them back on. Across every monitor, a single countdown appeared. Days, hours, minutes. No explanation, no instructions. Just a silent, inevitable march toward something. Meanwhile, reports poured in from around the globe. Off the coast of Chile, fishermen described glowing shapes rising from the ocean. In Siberia, seismographs recorded vibrations that matched the beacon's pulse. In Antarctica, satellites captured heat blooms beneath the ice in perfect synchrony with the countdown. The coordinates broadcast weeks earlier were no longer hypothetical. Other sites were waking. The beacon wasn't just a visitor, it was a signal flare, a trigger, a key. And whatever it had unlocked was no longer confined to a single desert. The general in command stood in silence as the numbers ticked downward on the monitors. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried no authority, only dread. "This isn't an arrival," he said. "It's a return." The countdown continued, steady, unstoppable, as the spire blazed brighter than the stars above. Chapter 5. The countdown ticked relentlessly, an ever-present reminder that the beacon's awakening was not the end but the beginning. Each passing hour, the numbers glowed brighter on the monitors, etched into every device connected to power, as though the signal itself had invaded the grid. No one could escape it. Phones, laptops, even hospital monitors in cities thousands of miles away now displayed the same shrinking digits. Humanity was being forced to watch. Inside the desert quarantine, fear curdled into hysteria. Soldiers mutinied, demanding evacuation. Scientists argued until their throats went raw. Some convinced the beacon was heralding contact, others certain it was summoning destruction. The observers barked orders, but their authority no longer mattered. The beacon had become the true commander of the camp. By the time the countdown reached its final 48 hours, phenomena erupted worldwide. In the Sahara, nomads reported strange geometric patterns etched into the sand overnight, glowing faintly before vanishing with dawn. In the Pacific, pilots saw vast shadows beneath the waves, moving too slowly and too deliberately to be whales. In South America, entire towns lost power for hours, only to see the lights surge back with greater intensity, as though fueled by something other than the grid. And then the dream spread. It was no longer confined to those stationed at the site. Across continents, people woke screaming, describing the same visions: skies blackened by colossal spirals of metal, landscapes remade into lattices of light, a voice whispering the same phrase again and again: "We are returning." Psychologists called it mass hysteria, but the precision was too sharp, the overlap too impossible to dismiss. At the site itself, the beacon transformed. The spire it had raised split into multiple branches, arching outward like the ribs of a colossal dome. Energy arced between them, forming a shimmering canopy that blanketed the camp. The air grew thick, humming as if saturated with invisible current. Every monitor inside the command tent went black, then re-lit with a message that froze every soul who read it: "Aste CCPD, EVA or MEMT peripard." Panic turned into paralysis. What did it mean? Host accepted. Was Earth itself the host? Or humanity? Or the beacon? Some scientists believed the meteorite had been a seed, waiting for conditions to ripen before germinating. Others whispered of a darker possibility: that Earth had always been part of a cycle, a field to be harvested when the time came. The final 24 hours were the longest in human history. Across the globe, news channels, despite government pressure, could no longer ignore what was happening. Amateur videos of glowing fissures, magnetic storms, and strange lights filled the internet. Millions watched the countdown shrink in real time, displayed on hacked billboards and television screens. No one could explain it. No one could stop it. At the beacon's site, the soldiers stopped resisting. Many fell into trances, kneeling in the sand with their eyes rolled upward, whispering phrases in the alien language that had plagued their dreams. Scientists scribbled furiously, documenting every pulse even as their hands shook. A few wept quietly, knowing they might be the last to record Earth as it was before the change. When the countdown reached the final hour, the beacon roared. The sound was not noise but vibration, so deep it rattled bones and knocked birds from the sky. The spire blazed like a second sun, its light bending the stars above until constellations twisted into spirals. Satellites orbiting Earth went blind, their lenses filled with nothing but white. The world below bathed in unnatural radiance, night turned to day, day to something beyond either. At zero, silence fell, a silence so profound that it swallowed breath, thought, even heartbeat. And then, without warning, the beacon projected upward, a column of light piercing the atmosphere, extending far beyond the range of human sight. Every compass spun madly, every instrument failed. The column split into beams that shot outward, crisscrossing the heavens like a lattice. The AI systems in the camp, long hijacked, activated one final time. Across every screen in every language appeared the same words, Jidbo a opn, Aravol minen tuo. The soldiers dropped to their knees. The scientists trembled. And in that moment, humanity realized the truth. The beacon was never a message. It was an invitation, and it had just been answered. Chapter 6. The desert air was no longer still. When the beacon's column of light lanced into the sky, the atmosphere itself began to tremble. Clouds spiraled unnaturally around the beam, forming perfect concentric rings that glowed faintly in the night. Lightning arced upward instead of downward, sucked into the column like moths to a flame. The soldiers, once hardened men trained for war, sank to their knees, their rifles slipping into the sand. The scientists who had come in search of knowledge now sat in stunned silence, some whispering prayers, others unable to speak at all. The countdown was over. The gateway was open. Above Earth, satellites recorded the impossible. Space around the planet rippled like water disturbed by a stone. Stars bent and blurred as though reality itself had been stretched. From the center of those ripples came shapes. Massive, jagged silhouettes sliding into focus.